Good evening. The last thing I expected in beginning a lesson on tracking your progress was to hear that the 39ers were stuck in Mount Vernon, Texas. Can't you imagine all our friends on that bus saying, "How much farther is it?" But I believe they'll make it, don't you? This past week, Tanya and I went with one of our families that sadly has moved away from us to Tennessee, and we drove a car and then came back the next day, and we planned our trip so that we knew exactly where we wanted to be at just a set time. That's right, we planned to be in Texarkana in time to eat breakfast at Cracker Barrel. And we made it. And for the rest of the way, we were asking each other, how much farther to the next Cracker Barrel? And off we went. The fact is that we track the things that are important to us, that we value, that are significant, that we wouldn't want to be without. We even track things that are potentially harmful because we want to keep them out of our system and be sure that we don't get too close to them or consume too much of them. There's a reason I have a jar of paper clips to show you tonight. And that's because in 1993, a bank in Abbotsford, Canada, hired a 23-year-old stockbroker named Trent. This was a relatively small suburb in the shadow of nearby Vancouver. And because of the location and the fact that Trent was a rookie, nobody expected too much of him, but he formed a simple daily habit. He began each morning with a jar holding 120 paper clips and another jar that was empty. As soon as he settled in for work, he would make a sales call. And once he did, he would take one paper clip out of that jar and put it in the empty one. And then he would make another call and paper clip, paper clip, paper clip. And he wouldn't stop until he had made 120 calls and moved 120 paper clips. Can you guess what happened to his business? You say, well, that's a lot for me. I don't know about 120, but what if you and I were to think about a few paper clips, and they represent the people we want to talk to about Christ. And before the day is over, or before the week, we're going to move those 5 or 10 or wherever they are to the other jar. You see, when we plan ahead of time where we need to be, and then we think of steps to get there, we can track the progress we make from one point to another. At Heritage Christian University, I had the incoming students in an orientation class. Yes, some were disoriented and needed the class. And one assignment we had was to plot out, to project how you would spend the next entire week. In segments, say, of 30 minutes, take a spreadsheet, and this is what you think you will do with your study time and your recreation, your sleep, your eating, your work, if you had a regular job, and then estimate. And at the end of the week, go back and compare what you actually did. Log each day, and then putting them side by side. Most all of us were surprised at the difference between what we thought we would do and what actually happened, sometimes because of interruptions and surprises and things out of the student's control, but sometimes because of other choices a young man or woman would make. The next part of the exercise was to take what's happened to you this past 7 days and plan a new week. And what will be the same and what will be different, and how will you know when 7 more days have passed that you have reached the point where you chose or aimed for? Of course, we all know the bus could break down, couldn't it? This is the first house that Tanya and I bought. 19 Tamerlane Avenue, West Babylon, New York. It was 1980. We'd been married 3 years, and we paid a whopping $33,000 for that house. It was a Veterans Administration foreclosure. There was no electricity, the windows were boarded up, there was graffiti all over the walls, and the kitchen sink was missing. It was a perfect house for a minister and his wife. The agent who took us to see the house, the batteries in his flashlight were going out, and so each room was a little bit dimmer than the previous one. And we said, we'll take it. We only needed $1,600 to get into that house. Guess how much money we had? That's right, none. But we had 2 sets of parents. So we borrowed $800 from my parents and $800 from Tanya's parents with the agreement that over the next 16 months, we would pay $50 back to each set of parents. So as another month came, wrote the checks. Another month came, wrote the checks. So we could feel closer and closer and closer to enjoying nothing but a mortgage and property taxes. Tracking our progress gave us a great sense of satisfaction, of fulfillment, of accomplishment. The fact is, when you look at life today, people track all kinds of things. Money and time and exercise and calories, assignments, projects, storage space, mileage, checkbook, you name it. It's a biblical concept. We're going to explore it now, first looking at Jesus himself and the fact that he had a plan, something of a schedule. He knew exactly the direction in which he needed to go, and he could more or less check off the marks as he did what he came to do. I think of Mark 1, 38 and 39. Let's go somewhere else, to the towns nearby, so that I may preach there also. That is what I came for. So he goes through the synagogues in Galilee. He's done this one, now this one, now this one, now this one. Then, so often in the Gospel of John, he talked about the daylight and the night. And we have to make the most of right now because it's not going to last. And he talked about the hour that had not yet come. You remember John 2 when his mother talked about the shortage of wine, and he said, "My hour has not yet come." Then in chapter 7 about the Feast of Tabernacles, he says to his half-brothers, "You go on, my hour has not come." Again and again and again. And then he says, starting in 12:23, "My hour has come." What? He's going to be put to death for the sins of the world, nailed to a cross, sacrifice himself so that we might be forgiven. He knew when, he knew how, and he knew where, and he had this agenda, this map, this GPS from the very beginning. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he prayed, what? That the cup might pass, also that this hour might pass. But if not, your will be done. And then he woke up his sleeping disciples. What was the difference between them? Jesus was alert, he was watchful, he was on guard, and he was prepared when Judas and the mob came. His disciples were exhausted and asleep, and so they feared and fled. But he woke them up and he said, "The hour has come, my betrayer is here." There's a time when his disciples said, "Herod Antipas wants to kill you." And he said, "You go and tell that fox, I cast out demons and perform cures today and tomorrow. And the third day I reach my goal." The Greek text literally says, "I'm completed," or "I'm perfected." Some versions say, "I finish my course. I'm going to do this and this and this, and I'm not going to let that fox, Herod, stop me." The church, you remember how Jesus laid out the plan. You're going to start here in Jerusalem, chapter 1:8 of Acts, and then you'll go to Judea and Samaria, and then the ends of the earth. And so you can see about 3,000 added. They repented of sin and were baptized on the day of Pentecost. Verse 47, the Lord added to their number day by day, to the church, those that were being saved. The number of the men, the males, came to be about 5,000. Multitudes were added. Great numbers through the ministry of Barnabas and Saul in Antioch. And then in Acts 6, going back a bit, here's one of these sort of summary statements about the whole brotherhood. The Word of God continued to increase. The number of the disciples multiplied greatly in Jerusalem, and many priests were becoming obedient to the faith. You turn over to chapter 9, 31. The church throughout all Judea and Galilee and Samaria. Can you see the mile marker? Start in Jerusalem, and then Judea and Samaria, and then go from there forward. But at this point, peace being built up, walking in the fear of the Lord, the comfort of the Holy Spirit, the church multiplied. It's a tracking. It's a measurement. It's noticing where we started, how far we've come, and with that in mind, what is yet to be done. Acts 16:5, the churches were strengthened in the faith, and they increased in numbers daily. So tracking is very much a scriptural, a biblical principle. We could have started in Genesis 1, and the first day, track 1, and the second day, and the third, through the sixth, and then God ceasing his work of creation on the seventh day. We could have talked about Israel coming out of Egypt and how often Moses and later Joshua would recap. We started here, and then we came there, and then we came there. And you notice in your Bible reading how often two particular kings are mentioned, Sihon and Og. Why? Because the defeat of those threats guaranteed that if the Israelites would continue to wage God's battles in obedient faith, the other enemies would fall. So you look to yesterday, keep your eyes on tomorrow, and you know where you are now and what to do next. We could talk about the period of the conquest and the settlement, and the first half of Joshua, how they conquer more of the land. And then part 2, they begin to distribute it. And this tribe will go here, and this one there, and so forth. So it's all tracked. It's all laid out. We could talk about the kings and notice the expansion and the reduction in their empires, depending on whether they tracked things God's way and sought his will first, or turned to their own devices. So we've seen Jesus keeping track, then the church, and then we've kind of taken a quick view through the Old Testament as well. But here's the passage that we heard read a moment ago. Not only did Paul keep a record of where he had been in proclaiming the good news in various places, but also he spent about a decade raising funds to assist the poor saints in Jerusalem and throughout Judea. Here's something of a timeline. Around AD 44 through 47, the church in Antioch sends Barnabas and Paul to Judea with relief funds. And then in Galatians 2, when he meets with those that had been apostles before him, the emphasis fell upon helping the poor and remembering them, which Paul also is very eager to do. And then chapter 16, you remember about the collection on the first day of every week for this opportunity that they had before them. AD 53 to 55, when he writes that letter from Ephesus to Corinth. And then 2 Corinthians, those 2 chapters, 8 and 9, he's in Macedonia. And now he's writing again, the time is coming. You pledged, you promised. It's time to follow through with what you said you would do. And those great principles about generosity and faith and sowing and reaping and how God provides the abundance. Now in Romans 15, it's AD 57, and he's in Achaia, writing to Rome, and it's the spring, perhaps AD 57. And then Paul goes on to Jerusalem. Why? Partly to bring this gift. And that's where he's spotted in the temple and to tell the record of how he met Jesus Christ on the road to Damascus and was baptized into Christ and so forth. So you see here, turn again with me to Romans 15, the places that he has been and how he has in his mind a framework. He has a layout, and it's going to be this place and this place and this place. Well, what's his goal? His goal is to get a message to the world. From Jerusalem, this is verse 19, as far as Illyricum, aim, no further place in these regions. I want to come and see you whenever I go to Spain. I want to get to Spain. But now I'm going to Jerusalem serving the saints. And he talks about Macedonia and Achaia making this contribution. And then he goes on to note in verse 28, when I finish this, I put my seal on this fruit of theirs, that is, I've received what they want to give. I'll do what? Go on by. Paul had a spiritual GPS. He had an agenda. He had a goal, something he was aiming for, and nothing would stop him from following through. Sometimes circumstances would hinder him. We could say the bus broke down occasionally, but he would get up again and resume where he left off. Brothers and sisters, the point for us is significant and powerful. It has to do with the fact that we must not let day after day after day go by waiting for someone else, something else, to affect us so that we react to it and we try to deal just with the fires that we have to put out. But rather to be proactive and to think about those actions and steps and habits that we can begin and then keep them on track. So, how do you track your progress? What are some practical ways? I've mentioned to you before in this same series on choosing your best life, I've noted a book titled Atomic Habits by James Clear. If you should read that book, there's some elements in it that we certainly would not support or endorse. But because all truth is God's truth, those suggestions that help us to stay with something that's important and good can be beneficial to us. First, you want to study and think and pray and perhaps get counsel from others. What are the things that you should pursue and go after and track? Oh, of course, the glory of God. Of course, obedience to Christ. Of course, building up one another and loving each other and so forth. But when you put it down to particulars, what are those areas in your relationship with Christ and in all of your life? Could be physical, family, practical, economic matters that you say, this is something that would help me to be a more effective servant of Christ. I keep boxes in our garage with stuff in them. In some boxes, I have specific junk. The other boxes, I have general junk. When I want to be sure I can find something, I label the box, and I make myself a list, and I save myself time by knowing how to go to it. But sometimes I've spent too much time on the general junk boxes. And sometimes I think, why do I even still have these boxes? I don't know exactly what's in them. I know none of you have experienced that, but that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Maximize the benefits of habit tracking. Let's say that you keep a calendar, or you keep a spreadsheet like we do at our house. We've been doing our Bible reading together this way for a while. We do 3 chapters in the Old and 1 chapter in the New every day, and we finish the New Testament in September. And we finish the Old Testament in November. And every day we can mark off, it's visual, it's satisfying, it's pleasing, and it spurs us on to think, we're this far along, we can do this again. Benjamin Franklin, when he was 20 years old, carried a small booklet everywhere, and he used it to mark his progress in 13 personal virtues. Things like lose no time, be always employed in something useful, and avoid trifling conversation. Those are good goals, aren't they? And at the end of each day, he would open the booklet and record his progress. Recording your last action creates a trigger that can initiate your next one. And you build a series of visual cues, whether it's on your calendar or if you still keep a checkbook, it's there, or a mileage log, or whatever it may be. One study of more than 1,600 people found that those who kept a daily food log lost twice as much weight as those who didn't. The mere act of tracking their behavior can spark their urge to change it. Habit tracking keeps you honest because you may exaggerate what you've done in a particular area, but when you write it down, it causes you to identify it exactly. And the progress is so attractive because it can become addictive, making you more and more motivated to do good things. It becomes its own form of reward because once you put that entry or mark that X, it's exciting, it's pleasing, and you want to do it again. But the fact is, if you're trying to track too many things, you may lose track of most or all of them. It's better to consistently track one habit than to sporadically track 10. Maybe your goal is in reaching people for Christ, as we noted. And you're going to identify that. That will be your focus from the time you get up in the morning. You plan out your day. Who are you going to run into? Who will you try to talk to? And so forth. Perhaps it's in your prayer life. And again, you put it down in writing exactly, perhaps the time, the topics, the person you're going to pray with or for, but maximize the benefits. And then focus on what you can do and not what everybody else ought to be doing. You know, we lose a lot of our opportunities because we get distracted by we're disappointed in someone else or some circumstance or situation. I've talked with you before about SMART goals that are specific and measurable and attainable and relevant and timely, like the mile post again on the highway. And when you see it, you know that you have reached it, and then you can move on to the next. And then you can make action steps as to how you will pursue that goal. If it's obvious, if it's visual right in front of you, if it's attractive and it's satisfying, you'll be more likely to follow through with it. You could use paper clips, you can use a calendar, use a note card. If you have a smart device in your home, I know you have to be very wary of those things, and some prefer not to use them at all. But if there's something you need to remember to do every day, and you have something that goes off to tell you to do it, whatever it may be, that can help you stay on track. Could be a note card that you keep in your pocket and you pull it out, and at the beginning of the day you have the 3 things that you're going to track today, let's say. If you miss one time, which we all do and whatever it may be, pick up the next time and don't burden yourself with guilt, and don't quit. Don't blow your plan just because you didn't follow through a particular time. If you really want to make sure that your goal is out there, that what you intend to do is more public, you take your spouse aside or a true friend, perhaps an accountability partner, and you say, here's what I'm aiming for, and this is how I intend to get there. And you can make a contract. I read about one man that did this in writing and committed himself that if he followed through with what he did, this would be the outcome, and if he failed, this would be the penalty. His name was Brian Harris, and he wanted to shed a few pounds, and so he decided over the next year, for each quarter, he would do a certain thing. Like quarter 1, he would make this adjustment, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4. He also listed a punishment. So if he didn't do these 2 things, write down his food and weigh himself every day, then he would have to dress up every work day. He would also have to pay his trainer $200 to use as he sees fit. Do you think he kept up with that behavior? 3 months later, he was doing so well, he'd hit his target for the first quarter, and he upgraded his goals. This time, if he didn't do this and this, he had to pay his trainer additional money. And if he failed to weigh himself, he had to give his wife $500 to use as she saw fit. Most painfully, here it is. This is the one that really hit me. If he forgot to run his sprints, he not only had to dress up for work every day, but this is the truth, he had to wear an Alabama hat for the rest of the quarter. Yes, he was an Auburn fan. Do you think he kept his goal? The idea is that with a contract and with a commitment shared with another person, there's an added layer, there's an added reinforcement for that habit that you want to track. You provide the progress, you evaluate yourself. This friend that's more objective than you are, your spouse or whoever, can do that as well, because what you're after is something objective. It's something that either you did it or you didn't do it. Consequences for successes or for not carrying through. And then finally this evening, never lose sight of your goal. Well done, good and faithful servant. Do you want to hear those words? How badly, how seriously, how eagerly do you want to hear those words? Jesus used an analogy with money, as we've done a bit tonight too, as a metaphor or a picture of taking what God has put in our hands and forming habits, setting goals, making plans, and then tracking our progress, so that when the master of the slaves came back, the one who had the 5 talents could say, I've brought 5 more talents. That didn't happen in an instant. He went step by step, day by day, action by action. Why? Because he knew the master was coming back, and he knew that he would stand before him. If you want to stay on course, track it. If you want to be where God would have you to be, know where you've been, know where you are, and know what needs to happen next in your life. And put those elements into place that will more or less, to some degree, ensure that you will do or not do what you've committed to. We offer the Lord's invitation. We've noted already that he came with his mind on the cross. He knew all along that that would be the hour when he would give his life for you and for me. There's not one of us that has perfect habits. Not one of us is always consistent. Not one of us has it together. And that's why we talk about ways we can become more like Christ and increase our motivation and our daily practice. If you're not a Christian, if you'd like to learn about being baptized into Christ, if you've reached that conviction, we'd be glad for you to respond tonight. Any prayer or other need that you have, won't you come? Let's stand and sing together.